This tutorial is a detailed overview of the V-Carve Toolpath. We're going to look at all of the options in the form and show you the effects of different settings that you have on the toolpaths that you create. So we're just going to take a moment to discuss a few points that will enable us to achieve great results every time we come to VCarve, as there are a number of factors to think about to get it right. Firstly, V-carving is the easiest way to create really attractive decorative elements with a CNC machine. Whether you are using it for text or a graphic, it's really fast to both calculate it in the software and pretty quick to run on the machine to ultimately give you what is a 3D look. And it's important to try and understand how V-carving works, and that the depth of the cut is determined by the tool angle and the width of the vectors. V-carving can only be done with closed vectors, as it will run the tool directly in the centre of the opposing vectors to the depth that the tool can essentially fit in between them and up to the maximum pass depth specified, and understanding this is essential when considering the perfect tool for the look that you want to achieve. So some points that we need to think about that can affect the outcome of our V-carving is to ensure that we have flat material. And adding to this point, we also need to make sure that our machine is level, as we want the tool to go into the material at an equal depth per vector width on all places that we are cutting, so we're not left with a piece that is unevenly cut. Another thing that we need to think about and make sure of is that the tool's Z0 is set accurately to the top of the block. Setting to the top of the block eradicates the necessity of accurately measuring the thickness of the material and ensures that the tool enters and leaves the material where it should to create the sharp points that it requires. We also need to have accurately sized tools. Even if our tool states that it's a 90-degree tool, it's best that we measure that, as even 1 degree out will alter the look of the part when coming to preview it, or even running it on the machine. Another aspect to tooling is to ensure that our tools have a sharp point and not a small flat, as this will also take away from the overall effect, and we also want to make sure that there are no dents in the tool too. Lastly, we need to make sure that we are using clean, closed vectors to V-carve, as this will ensure that we will have nice, smooth V-carving. We also need to ensure that these vectors are not overlapping, as it will make it unclear to the software which areas we want to V-carve. And if you do have a design that requires overlapping, you can create separate V-carving toolpaths which are ran in the order that you require them to achieve the effect that you are after. So that's pretty much the basics of V-carving. Let's open up the software and take a look at a few examples. So we'll go over to open an existing file, and in the project folder we're going to open the VCarve example. We'll open that up. So now we're going to run through some various examples that you may well come across when creating V-carving projects. So here you can see that I have a basic text entity. It's got the word Vectric in there, and we're just going to look at V-carving this to begin with, just to show you the basics. Okay, so we've got the text, so all we need to do now is switch over to the Toolpaths tab. So as always, it's important to check over your material setup before creating any toolpaths. So here I've got a material thickness of 1 inch. I'm actually going to change that. We're going to make that 1/2 inch in there. We're going to set our XY datum position in the lower left. Z0, we're doing that from the material surface. And then here we can check over the rapid Z-gaps, home and start position, ensuring everything's safe and appropriate. Might want to just alter the Z-gap there, just change that to 1/2 inch, and then we could go ahead and press OK. So to start with, we're going to select our text, the Vectric text, and we're going to come over to Toolpath Operations, and we're going to look at the V-Carve Engraving Toolpath. So we're going to look at the very basics of the V-Carve Toolpath to begin with, and then we'll look at all of these further options that we have within our form throughout this tutorial. So as always, starting at the top, we're going to look at our cutting depths. So the start depth for this, in our case, is going to be at 0, which would be on the material surface. Now, if you had created a project where you had created a pocket that you wanted to V-carve in, then you'd put the start depth at the depth of the pocket that you had created. In this case, this is a very basic example. We're just V-carving straight onto our material surface, and so we're going to put our start depth at 0. Then we have the option to apply a flat depth. In this case, we're going to keep this unchecked, but we will be revisiting this later on in the tutorial. And so with this unchecked, our toolpath will be calculated to run directly in the centre of the opposing vectors to the depth that the tool can essentially fit in between them and up to the maximum pass step specified. And multiple Z-level passes will be automatically calculated where the tool needs to cut deeper than its pass steps specified in the tool database. So here we're going to go and select a tool. So we're going to use the select option, and here we're just going to go with a 90-degree half-inch V-bit in there, and we'll use the select option to select it. And so this 90-degree V-bit will run in the centre of each one of these characters, and it will run down until it reaches the width of the two vectors, so the opposing vectors within each character, and that's what creates the depth. Okay, so we're just going to miss out all of these options. We're just looking at a very basic V-Carve example here. Here we can give that a name, so we're just going to call this one V-Carve, and we're just going to put 90 at the end, just to remind ourselves that we are using a 90-degree V-bit there. And then we could go ahead and press calculate. And so that will open up the preview toolpaths form. We can see the toolpath here, and then if we go ahead and preview that toolpath, we can see the result of that V-bit tool with the text that we are cutting into. And so the result of the V-carve is all governed by how far away the vectors are apart and the angle of the tool used. For example, if we take a look at the letter E here, we can see that we have a wider area here. If we just take a look at the actual vector as well, just so we can compare the two. Okay, so here is the E vector, and if we just zoom in on the preview of that toolpath here, we can see that the two vectors here are further apart, and here you'll see we are getting a much deeper cut there. Okay, so we're cutting that just around 0.195, and then here you can see that the vectors are closer together, and so here we're getting a shallower cut where we're getting kind of 0.7, I think is the maximum depth there. And then at the edge over here where the vectors are very close together, you see we're getting a much shallower cut there at 0.036. And so it's important to understand that your tool angle and the vector width will have an effect on how deep it will cut inside of the vectors. So let's have a look at some more examples. So let's just reset this preview, put that back in Z, and in the 2D view we're just going to zoom active view to the drawing limits, and we'll actually tile the windows vertically here so you can see the 2D on the left and the 3D on the right. We'll just close out the preview toolpaths form. I'm going to take this Vectric text. I'm just going to create a copy above the current position there. So we'll press Control and Alt just to move that up, and then Control and Alt, and we're going to create a copy at the bottom there. So now we're going to look at applying a V-Carve toolpath to the new copies of the Vectric text, where we're going to look at the effects of using different tools. So let's take this Vectric text. We're going to go into the V-Carve Toolpath. I have a start depth of 0, and then the tool that we're going to use, we're actually going to look at using quite a large angle, a 120-degree angle. Select that, and then in here we're just going to call this one V-Carve 120, and then go ahead and press calculate. Okay, and then we can go now and preview that toolpath. And so we can see here that we have a much shallower cut, and that's because we're using a much wider angle tool to cut in between the width of those vectors. So let's just preview all the toolpaths just so we can compare it to the original 90-degree tool. Okay, so with the 90 on the E, we're cutting down to around 0.18 in there, and then on this one we're actually cutting down to just over 0.11. Okay, so let's just close out there. Now we'll take this text, I'm going to go back into the V-Carve Toolpath. This time we're going to look at using a 60-degree tool. So here we're just going to give that a name, and we'll call this one V-Carve 60, press calculate, and then we can go ahead now and preview that toolpath. So let's just maximize the 3D view, and we can see that we have a much steeper angle cut, creating more of a sharper look. So here you can see we're actually cutting down to about 0.35 here. And this is the beauty of the software, is that we can visualize each tool's results in the 3D view before taking it to the machine to carve. So now we're going to look at another example where we'll be looking at V-carving into overlapping text. So let's just close out of the preview toolpaths form. I'm going to right click, I'm just going to delete all of these toolpaths, and then actually we'll just go in there and reset that preview, close back out of the preview toolpaths form, then we'll go and tile our windows vertically. Then in our layers bar here, we're just going to uncheck the visibility of the text layer, and we're just going to switch on the visibility of the overlapping text layer, and we'll make that the active layer. So here I have welcome text, and if we just pin out the drawing tab, if we go into the draw text tool, you'll see that it was created using the brush script MT font. So let's just close out, and if we take a look at the text itself, you can see that we have overlapping characters going into one another. So let's have a look at what happens when we come to V-carve this. So with that text selected, let's go over into the V-Carve Toolpath. Now, one of the nice things about the V-Carve Toolpath is that with overlapping text where we've got these characters that go in and out of each other, the V-Carve automatically welds the text so that we don't have to do this prior to V-carving. And so here we can go in, select a tool, just go the standard 90-degree V-bit, and then we could go ahead and give that a name. So here we're just going to call this one Welcome 90, just so I know what tool I'm using, and then we could go ahead and press calculate. The software will calculate that for us, and then we can simply go in there and just go ahead and preview that. And so you can see we've got a real nice effect there, and we can see that everything is just kind of smoothly going into each of the different characters. And that's the real nice thing about this toolpath, is that it will automatically weld the text characters for you, so you don't have to do it before going into this toolpath. However, it is also worth mentioning here that there may be times where you may need to manually alter the text for best results, and this is all down to the fonts that you are using. So let's take a look at an example where we may need to go in and edit the font itself. So if we just delete this toolpath, and we'll reset that preview, close out there, switch over to the drawing tab, maximize the 2D view, and use this option here to zoom to fit. We're just going to nudge this down over here, and then we're going to go in and we're going to look at drawing some text. So here we're just going to use the brush script font here, and we're going to type in the word software. Okay, we'll close out and we'll just swing that over into the middle there. And if we take a look, we can see where the O comes into the F and the T, and so on. So we've got this overlapping set of characters here. So let's take a look at the effect of this word using this font in the V-Carve Toolpath. So we'll switch back over there. And so we'll take that software text and we'll go into the V-Carve Toolpath, select a tool, we're going to use that 90-degree V-bit again, and we're just going to call this one Software 90, and then go ahead and press Calculate, and then we could go ahead and preview that. And so if we just zoom in to take a look here, so the nature of this font, we have tails going to and from the next character, and this is where sometimes we can have problematic areas. For example, if we take a look at where the F and the T join and the A and the R, we have these inconsistencies here. We don't really have a smooth connection between the two characters, and so you may have to go in there and manually fix the vectors up. So let's take a look in the 2D view at what we're seeing here. So we'll just tile the windows, we'll just close out the preview toolpaths form, we'll just switch over to the design tab. Okay, so if we just zoom in, okay, so we can see where the F and the T come, they're not quite overlapping cleanly there, and then over to the A and the R, and you can see we've got this huge inconsistency there. And so with cases like this, you will need to just go in and manually tweak those, and this is all just down to the nature of the font itself. And so with something like this, we'd then go in and look at using the weld option. Okay, so do we want to replace our vectors, or do we want to keep the original objects as well as welding the text? Here we'll just replace them. Okay, so we've welded the text together, and then if we just zoom in at the A and the R, this is where we'd then need to go into node edit mode just to really fix those problematic areas. And so we could just look at deleting that point, deleting that point, deleting this point here. And that's, you'll see now we've got a nice smooth transition there, and then between the F and the T, we'll take those, delete it, take that one, delete that, I want to delete this also, and then maybe turn that into a smooth point, and then just alter the handle there just to get a better flow. Okay, so you can see we've got a much nicer transition there, and so now what we could do is we can go over to the V-Carve Toolpath, and then we'll just go in there into the V-Carve Toolpath. Or actually what we could do is just double click on the original V-Carve Toolpath, select our new text there, and then we're just going to go ahead and calculate that. We'll reset that preview, and then we can preview that toolpath. And so now you'll see that we have a nice transition between the F and the T, as well as the A and the R. And so again, this just kind of proves how powerful this toolpath preview is, in that if we just zoom in at those areas, we can now see that we have nice smooth joins between each one of those fonts that we managed to fix just by using the node edit tools. Now, in some instances, you may encounter other problems with your text. Depending on your font, you may have intersecting areas which can be problematic and produce undesirable results. So let's take a look at an example of that. So let's reset that preview. We're just going to delete this toolpath, close out. We're just going to switch back over to the drawing tab, maximize the 2D view, use this option here to zoom to fit. Then we're just going to take this text and we're just going to delete it. Then we're going to go in and we're going to use the draw text option. So in my font list, I have a font called Matilda, and if I press M on the keyboard, that's going to take me to all of the M fonts in the list. So here is the font, and here I'm just going to we'll set the height of this to 4 inches, and then we're just going to type in the word welcome. Okay, so close out there, and then let's just put that in the center of our job, and you can see that we've got this text and we have characters going into the next character like so. So we've got this nice effect here. Right, and so with that text, let's go and switch over to the Toolpaths tab. I'm going to go into that V-Carve Toolpath, I'm going to select a tool, 90° half-inch tool, give that a name. We're going to call this one Welcome 90, and then we're going to go ahead and press Calculate. And so the software has flagged up an error message telling us that these vectors may contain overlaps or intersections which may lead to unexpected results. And would we like to use the vector validator to locate them, or just continue with the V-carving? Now in this case, it's always best practice to go to the vector validator to see what those problematic areas are. So the software has automatically opened up the vector validator on the drawing tab for us, and we have the V-carving mode automatically switched on. And that's because we're checking over a vector for V-carving, and we know that the V-carving handles the welding of the text internally, so these overlapping characters, and so it's not fussed about the overlap of the characters here, but the software has found some other areas that do require our attention. So let's see what those areas are. So we're going to use this option here to search selected. And so we can see, judging by these symbols, that we have three problematic areas. We've got intersections and overlaps. So let's just zoom in to see what we've got here in the 2D view. Okay, so on this, you can see we've got this interesting loop there. And then over at the bottom here, we've got something strange going on there. We've got another vector coming out, and it's probably going back on itself as well, so that would create an interesting effect if we was to V-carve that. And then over here again, we also have another loop. Okay, so let's just take a look at the effect of this V-Carve Toolpath with this text without fixing any of these problems. Okay, so we'll just take that text, calculate it, and we're just going to ignore the prompt to fix up any vectors, and we're just going to use the option here to continue anyway. Here we could go ahead and preview that toolpath. And so really it doesn't actually look too bad, but if you were very particular about the effect that you're getting here, you'll see that we do have a strange undulation on the top of the E there. Over on the M, we've got an interesting shape going on here, as well as the top of the E there. And so we could look at fixing those areas, but with the help of the vector validator. So let's just reset that preview, and then we'll go over into the 2D view, and then here we'll just look at fixing those areas. So it's this loop here, the loop over there, and then we've got this kind of intersection over here. So let's just close out there. Okay, so to do this, we need to put this into a vector mode. So with that text, we're actually just going to look at welding it, and we're just going to replace the text. Okay, so we're going to look at the E here, and then if we select it, we can say delete. We don't need that there, like so. And then over here at the M, if we just zoom in, and if we go into node edit mode, you can see we've got all sorts of trouble here. So we're just going to delete that node there, delete that node there, and then what we'll do is we'll just look at smoothing that point. We could even look at deleting it, and then just look at using this handle just to pull that in to create that nice shape there. And then back over at this E, we're going to take that and we're going to delete that loop so that we've got rid of that there. Okay, so now we've kind of fixed all of those areas. We're going to go back into the Welcome V-Carve Toolpath. Now this time, because we've edited the text, we need to select it here, and then now we can go ahead and calculate that. You'll see that we are no longer prompted with that message of any problem vectors, and so now we can preview that to see the effects there. Okay, and we can see now that we don't have the undulations on the E where we had those loops, and we have a much smoother part here for our M. And so it's a very subtle yet a much more clean difference. And so that really is the basics of V-carving. Now we're going to look at some more advanced options where we'll use the flat depth option when V-carving, and this enables us to limit the depth that the tool will machine to, which is used for flat bottomed carving and engraving. So we're just going to reset this preview, right click, and we'll just go ahead and delete that toolpath. We'll close out there, we'll go into the 2D view, and we're just going to switch off the visibility of the overlapping text layer, and then we're going to switch on the clearance layer here. So here we have two squares that we drew in the software, and we're going to use these to demonstrate the basics of the flat depth option in the V-Carve Toolpath. So let's switch over to the Toolpaths tab. Just use this option here to zoom to fit. I'm going to take this square here, we're going to go over into the V-Carve Toolpath. So we're going to select this option here to apply a flat depth, but we need to specify a depth that we want to cut down to. So here we're going to put in 0.2 of an inch. And so by entering this cut depth here, what we should see is a flat pocket being machined to 0.2 of an inch, where we'll be left with a nice bevel around the edge of the square because of the V-bit tool. Okay, so here we're going to use a 90-degree half-inch tool again, and here we're just going to give that a name. We're just going to call this one Square 1 90 degrees, and then we'll go ahead and press calculate. So let's go ahead and preview that toolpath. Okay, so we can see that that V-bit tool has cleared out that square at a depth of 0.2 of an inch, and as it's got to the edge, we've created that real nice beveled effect there. Now, as we are using a V-bit tool, you can see that we are presented with witness marks. And so in order for us to create a flat, clean pocket, then we could look at taking advantage of the fact that we can apply clearance tools to the toolpath, which enables us to use an end mill, a ball nose, or engraving cutters to machine the large flat bottom regions, followed by a V-bit or an engraving tool to cut the outline and the corner regions to create the beveled edge effect. So let's have a look at an example of this. So we'll close out the preview toolpaths form, switch over to the 2D view. We're going to take this square here, we're going to go into the V-Carve Toolpath. So here we're going to select a tool, so we're going to go with the same 90-degree half-inch V-bit in there. And we need to specify our clearance tools. First off, we also must specify our flat depth. So we're going in at a flat depth of 0.2 like we did earlier. And then the clearance tools, we just simply select a tool from the tool database. In this case, we're going to look at clearing that out with a 1/4 inch end mill. And then we can select that, and we can see it's been added to this clearance tools list. If you wanted to check over the settings for this tool without affecting the tool database but just this toolpath, we can use the edit option here, or we can glance over things like the pass depth and the step over in this case. Okay, so I'm happy with those, so we could go ahead and press OK. And if you didn't want to use that tool, then you simply use the remove option and it will remove that from the clearance tools list. In this case, I do want that tool, so we're going to select that 1/4 inch end mill. We're going to put that in there. So now that we have a clearance tool in the list, we now have the ability to really control how we cut this clearance pass out. And so working our way down the form, you'll see that we have two options, and this is to choose the strategy in which we actually clear this square out. First off, we have an offset strategy, so that will just follow the shape of the square. And then we have the raster strategy, which goes back and forth according to whichever angle you choose to raster this out at. Moving on down, we've got cut direction. So we have the option to apply a climb or a conventional cut. And this is down to the way that the cutting teeth on the tool engage with the material and the way that chips are removed and deposited. So to learn more about this and to find out which option will be best for the application that you are using, you can research these methods online, and I personally think it's worth investigating the benefits of either of these choices. So as we're using the raster strategy, we have the option here to apply a raster angle. It's currently set to 0 degrees, which just means that that's going to be cutting parallel to the x-axis. If you wanted that parallel to the y-axis, where it's going back and forth in y, then you'd simply change the angle to 90 degrees in there. And if you wanted to, you could add a ramp plunge move. And this just stops you vertically cutting in with the tools. So some tools don't really have a good cutting face when moving vertically downwards, and so adding in this ramp move just provides some horizontal movement, and it just really lessens the wear and the tear of the tool. And so here we'll look at doing that, so we'll check that option here, and then here we just specify a distance, and so we're just defining the length of the ramp. In this case we'll just go with 1/4 of an inch, and then we could just give that a name. We're just going to call this one square 2 90, and then we could go ahead and press calculate. And so you can see it's provided us with two toolpaths. We have a clear tool, so that's using the end mill, and then we have another tool here, which is the V-bit tool, that's going to go around the edge to create that beveled edge. So if we just undraw the visibility of the V-bit toolpath there, we're just going to take a look at the clearance tool. So if we just have a look at this down this view over here, okay, if we just zoom in over to our part, and so we can see this aqua line here represents the ramp, so it's going in and then ramping back to the pass depth, and then it begins the actual raster cutout. So let's just go ahead and preview the clear tool there. So that's using that end mill. Okay, so we can see that's cut to a depth of 0.2. We have a nice flat bottom here, as opposed to what we had using just the V-bit tool. And then over here we've got, if we just switch that on, you'll see that we've just got the V-bit just coming in, just clearing up the edges just to create that nice beveled effect. And when we go ahead and press preview, you can see we've got a much better result as opposed to the first example where we just used that V-bit there. Now, one of the really nice things about the V-Carve Toolpath is that we can be really efficient with our toolpaths and preserve the longevity of our tools by creating multiple clearance passes before we use the final V-bit tool, which is handy for all sorts of jobs ranging from large-scale sign making to small intricate dies and presses. So let's have a look at an example that uses multiple tools to create a sign. So let's go to File, Close. I'm not going to save the changes here. Now we're going to open up an existing file. We're going to open up the Flying Scotsman. So I'll open that up here. So here we have a part that is 15 inches wide and 8 inches tall, the depth of 1/4 of an inch. And so we're going to look at V-Carve in this sign, where we're going to machine in between this vector here and the actual Flying Scotsman text. So we'll end up with a nice beveled edge around the part, and then we'll have a nice beveled edge around all of the text also. And then we'll just do a simple cutout for the outside profile here. So let's switch over to the Toolpaths tab. Let's check over our material setup. So 1/4 inch material, XY in the lower left, Z0 on the material surface, and then check over your rapid Z gaps, clearance plunge, ensuring that everything's safe and appropriate. So we'll just change that to 1/4 of an inch in there, and then we could go ahead and press OK. So let's go into the V-Carve Toolpath. So first thing we're going to do is specify our vectors, okay? Then we need to input a flat depth. So here we want to cut down at 0.1 of an inch. And we need to select a tool, so we're going to use the select option here, whereby we're going to look at using a 60-degree quarter-inch tool to cut this out. And then we could go ahead and press select. And then we're going to use this option here to add in a clearance tool. So we're going to use the select option here. So we're going to look at using an 1/8 inch end mill to clear inside between the text and the inner border here. So we'll just go with those settings, and then we'll just give that a name, and we're just going to call this one V-Carve. Just keep this fairly simple here. And then we could go ahead and press calculate, and then we could simply go ahead and preview that toolpath to see what we've got. Okay, so you'll see then what happened was we previewed the toolpath for the toolpath that we had selected, which is the V-bit part of this toolpath. So let's just undo last. We'll select our clearance tool first, then we'll preview that to see how that looks, and then we'll take our V-bit tool and then we'll preview this also. Now this isn't too bad, however we can see a lot of evidence of the V-Carve toolpath getting in at areas that 1/8 inch end mill simply couldn't get to, and so we're getting a lot of witness marks in between the letters and between the actual characters themselves. So we could then look at taking advantage of adding in an additional tool to help clear this out. So let's just go back into that toolpath. So here we're going to use the select option again. This is where I can select another tool to basically clear this part out. So I'm going to use a smaller tool this time. So we'll look at using a 1/16 inch tool. And then again, we'll just go ahead and press calculate. And you'll see now that we have 3 toolpaths. We have one for the 1/8 inch end mill, we have one for the 1/16th, and then we have the one for our V-bit. So let's just uncheck these. We'll just reset the preview and take a look at what we've got. So with the 1/8 inch end mill, let's just go ahead and preview that. Okay, so that's all the areas that we are able to possibly get into here. Then we have the 1/16 inch end mill, and if we just draw the visibility there, you'll see that we're actually getting in to some of those areas that the V-bit was getting into before. So let's just preview that to see how that looks. So I'll use the preview option there, okay, and you'll see that it's actually creating the steps here just to help the V-bit when we come to run the V-bit toolpath afterwards. It's just going to help reduce the stress on that tool because we've machined quite a lot of this away, and you can see the steps around the text and inside the text here as well as the border. So let's just put that back in Z. Then we'll take our V-bit tool to run the final V-carve of the sign, and we can go ahead and preview that toolpath. And again, we can see that this doesn't look too bad. This is looking a lot better than what it was. We're seeing less of the witness marks from the V-Carve toolpath. Okay, so you see it really kind of eliminated some of those areas there. So let's just put that back in Z. Let's see if we can get any better by using a smaller tool to clear out some of these areas that we're seeing between the characters. So double click to go back into the V-Carve toolpath. We're going to use the select option here. This time we're going to look at a 32 tool. So here we'll press select, and then again we'll go ahead and calculate that, and we'll just undraw the toolpath visibility for each one of those. Okay, so here we've just introduced the third one here, so you can see it's actually going to be cutting in at these areas here. The nice thing about this toolpath is that when you use the clearance tools, it only cuts into the areas that it needs to. And so hopefully if we go ahead and preview that, you'll see that it's actually cleared a lot of those witness marks from the V-Carve toolpath previously away. And then we could simply come over and then run that V-bit tool. we wanted to, we could also look at clearing this out using a V-bit tool as well. So let's have a look at the effect of that. So we're going to reset the preview. I'm just going to double click to go back into the V-Carve Toolpath. We're going to use the select option here. We're going to look at using the V-bit 60° 1/8 inch tool. We'll select that. And with that selected, you may have noticed that this option here, corner sharpen, has automatically been switched on. And so what that does is the software will find out where the corners are and it will cut into them to create nice sharp corners rather than rounded ones. And I'll show you the effect of this being on and off shortly. So with that switched on, we'll go ahead and calculate that. And then we'll just simply undraw all the toolpaths. So we're going to start with this clearance tool, which is the 1/8 inch. Then we're going to move on to the 16th inch tool. Then we'll move on to the 32 tool. Okay, so it's just a little bit in those areas there. Then we have this V-Carve clear. Okay, so that's just going to go around the edge of our text, around the edge of our part. And so you'll see that we've got these tails coming off in the corners, and that's what's going to create the corner for us. At the moment we have quite a radius corner, and that's because we are using a rounded tool. And so by using the corner option within the V-Carve Toolpath for this particular tool, it's going to come in there to create those corners. So here we could go ahead and preview that. Okay, so that's with the corners. If we just go back out there and just uncheck the option to corner sharpen and then press calculate, and then if we just go ahead and reset that toolpath, but we'll just reset all the visible toolpaths here, you'll see that it just creates a rounded edge here like so. Okay, so ideally you really want to go in there and create those sharp corners. So we'll go back in, use corner sharpen, press calculate, and then we'll just preview that toolpath there. And we'll just undo that. Okay, so I just want to preview this toolpath only. I just so happened to preview all the toolpaths. So we're going to use the preview selected toolpath option. You'll see that just corners that off nicely. And then finally we'll go in there with the final V bit where we could go and preview that toolpath just to finish that off and sharpen all of that internal detail as well as everywhere else. And so even though we are using quite a lot of different tools, we are actually preserving the longevity of the tools by creating these multiple clearance passes. So let's just close out here and we'll just quickly run over a final toolpath, and we're just going to take that outer vector, run a profile toolpath on this. We're going to cut all the way through the part, whereby we're just going to use a 1/4 inch end mill here. Select that, we're going to machine that on the outside. We'll go ahead and calculate that, and we'll preview that toolpath. We'll go ahead and delete our waste material, and if we wanted to, we could then look at using a global fill colour, go with a black just to fill that out, just so that we can get a good idea of what our part would look like if we was to paint it up. So let's just go ahead and save that file. Then we're just going to close out, and we're going to open back the VCarve example file. And now we're just going to look at a few more options at the bottom of our form. So we're going to look at this start point and selection order. So let's just switch over to the Toolpaths tab. We're going to go into the V-Carve Toolpath. So here we're looking at the bottom section, use vector start points and use vector selection order. So let's just box select these vectors here. So we're going to use a flat depth here. We're going to put in a flat depth of 0.1. We're going to use the select option here, and then from our V-bits list we're going to use the 90° 1/2 inch V-bit. Then we'll go ahead and press select. And then we'll use a clearance tool, so we'll select one from here. We'll use the 1/8 inch end mill, and then we can come over and just give that a name. We'll just call this one V-Carve 1, and then we'll go ahead and press calculate. So I don't have any control over the order that the software machines these in. It just picks what it considers to be the most efficient order. And so if we go ahead and just preview this, or preview the clearance toolpath, so it's doing the circle first, followed by the square, and then it's going to come down and create that octagon shape. We just speed that up a little bit more. And then for the V-Carve toolpath, it's going to come over to the octagon, this rectangle, and then the circle. Now, if I wanted to control the order, we can do that in the V-Carve toolpath. So let's just double click to open that up. And then we'll go ahead and tile our windows. So let's just select all of these and put them in node edit mode, just so we can see where the start points are. Okay, so we've got a start point over here, start point over here, and a start point over here. If we changed it so the start point is here for this one, then we'll cut that out, and then we'll make the start point for this one over here. So we'll use that option to make the start point, and then this one will make this as the start point. And then if we go ahead now and select the octagon first, followed by the rectangle, followed by the circle, then use this option here to use vector start points, use vector selection order, so this one first, that second, that third, and then go ahead and calculate that. If we reset that preview, let's take a look at what we've got here. So if we preview this, so we've got the octagon first, followed by the rectangle, followed by the circle. And so if we come over to the 2D view and press N on the keyboard, just to remind ourselves of where the start points are, we've got it over here, at the bottom left hand corner, then the top right hand side of the circle, and we can see that the toolpath's coming over to this point here, then it's going over to this point here, and then it's going to this point here. And so it's just remembering the start points that we used to select that. So then we could go ahead and preview that toolpath. And so those two options just give us further control over the toolpath itself. Right, so we're just going to reset this preview, we're going to close out, and then we're going to just click into the white space, and we're just going to select this layer here, projecting text. Okay, we're just going to delete all of these toolpaths, and then we're just going to switch over to the design tab. Then we'll maximise the 2D view and use this option here to zoom active view to the drawing limits. Go into the modelling tab, and you'll see that we have a component here that's currently switched off. And then if we go ahead and tile our windows, we can see the component there. So we're going to look at one of the last options in the V-Carve toolpath, and that's how we can do a V-Carve toolpath on a 3D model. So to start with, let's just go over to our material setup. I'm just going to quickly set this up. So just going to have a small gap above our material here. And then I'm just going to run straight into a 3D finishing toolpath. So we're going to use an 1/8 inch ball nose in this case, whereby we're just going to use the model as the boundary, and then we could simply go ahead and press calculate to calculate that for us. Okay, and then we could go ahead and preview that. So here is our 3D part, what it would look like if we was to cut that out with an 1/8 inch ball nose. Now, I do recommend that if you are going to do this, that you apply a 3D roughing toolpath prior to creating the 3D finish toolpath, just to ensure that you hog out all the material using a larger tool before going in with a smaller tool to get in at all the detail. Okay, but for demonstration purposes, I'm just showing you this as a 3D finish. So here is our part. So now we want to take this text and we want to V-carve onto the actual football itself. So we're going to go into the V-Carve toolpath. So here we're going to put in a start depth of 0. And the reason we're putting it in at 0 is because we're going to make use of this option here to project the toolpath onto the 3D model. And so the software will just take the contours of the model as if it was 0 and machine from there. So here we're going to use a tool. So we're going to use a 90-degree 1/2 inch tool in this case, select that, use the option here to project the toolpath onto the 3D model, and we can just call this one text. Then we could go ahead and press calculate, and we can see that that toolpath is being projected onto the football. And so when we go ahead and preview that, we can see the effect there. Okay, so it's just always good to remember that you need to project the toolpath onto the 3D model if you're wanting to V-carve onto 3D parts. So the last option that we have in this form is the vector selection option. It's currently set to manual at the moment, and what that means is you as a user needs to go in and manually select the vectors that you want to apply your V-Carve toolpath to. You can look at using the selector option here, where vectors can be automatically selected based upon criteria and rules that you apply within this form. And there are a number of tutorials that cover this in much more detail. And so that completes this in-depth guide to the V-Carve toolpath. Thank you for watching.